Meeting to order. It is 2:37 p.m. on this Thursday, February 9th. This is the AMATS Technical Advisory Committee meeting. First, before I forget, we're going to do roll call. Mr. Carr?
Here.
Ms. Epstein is not here. Mr. Wilbur?
Here.
Mr. Morris?
Here.
Mr. Morgan?
Here.
Ms. Katz? Here. Ms. Marmello is here. Ms. White? Here. Mr. Hanson?
Here.
All right. We're all here and we have one. Craig, would you mind doing the public involvement announcement?
Sure. All the AMATS meetings are public meetings. The public is given an opportunity to comment. What we usually do is we'll have a business item, we'll have a presentation by a staff member or consultants. After that, the committee can discuss it, and then the public will be given an opportunity to comment before each business item. So, here you go.
Thank you. All right, our first item is the approval of the agenda. I heard there was some minor modifications to that.
Let's see if I have this correctly. So, item 5D, the operating agreement, we will not hear that today. We're still working on some revisions. And I believe there's been a request to have item 6B, Abbott Road rehabilitation, moved up first before the business items, so we can do that. That's
Is that okay?
what I've heard of the changes.
My other question, I guess, is are there any action items for the 2035 MTP? If not, can we go down to information?
There are not any, as far as I know. We're just repeating groundwork today at the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Okay. Is there any problem with moving 5A down to 6A then?
No.
Chair, Craig, the Bike and Pedestrian Advisory Committee bylaws, this is the first time we've seen it. Would this be more of a presentation, and then we can either have a work session on it, or, I just thought.
Okay. Well, it's certainly up to the committee. The bylaws are patterned off of the both the freight and air quality group bylaws. They're pretty much boilerplate. The main differences have to do with, obviously, it's membership of a bike and ped committee as opposed to freight, so those things are different. They've been posted for at least a week, but you're the committee. If you want to have a work session, I mean, they're not too spectacular, but we're happy to. We're not in a hurry. We're not in a rush. I think our first public meeting is sometime in May, so we have time if we want to. We'd like to, obviously, we'd like to have when I say public meeting, first public meeting for the Area-wide Trail, which is our next thing that relates to bike and ped. It'd be nice to have a bike and ped committee formed and on board and rolling by the time we get started with Area-wide Trails.
Yeah, I just had some questions and would like to have more background about the high number of members and their organizations that they represent, and how those are chosen and why. And I'm not sure that I'd be ready to vote on it today. So I think we can leave it there for business and see how it goes.
All right, are there any other proposed changes to the agenda?
I'll move to. Sorry.
Move to approve.
Second.
So move by Ms. Howe, second by Mr. Morris.
As modified.
As modified. Any opposed? Hearing none. Agenda is approved. Now we actually have some minutes. We'll start, I guess we can go individually, start with the October 14th, 2010 minutes.
I'll move to approve. Second.
Moved by Ms. Howe, seconded by Ms. Witt. Are there any opposed to accepting the minutes for October 14th, 2010? Any modifications? Hearing none. We are moved. Moving right along.
Move to approve March 2nd minutes.
March 10th. March 10th.
Second.
Moved by Ms. Howe, seconded by Mr. Carr. Any opposed?
Any corrections?
Yeah, any corrections or?
I got a couple, but I'll just give them to Jill. They're not content.
Or not content, right? Yes.
It
I was there and I'm not listed as attendance. I mentioned on page 6.
You snuck in to say one thing and then we can fix that.
I don't remember. Okay.
Found it, just a couple typos. So.
Add that Ms. Epstein was in attendance. Right, any other changes, we're moving to accept, any opposed to accepting with minor modifications?
Oh, yes, you did, Highland Car.
That's okay.
Sorry.
Hearing none opposed?
Move to approve April 14th.
Minutes.
Second.
Are there any changes or modifications to this?
I just add my name that I was at this one here too, in the appendix. Or is that working?
Any other changes? Any opposed to accepting this with a minor change? Hearing none, there so be. Thank you. Thank you, Francis. We'll eventually catch up, right? Mr. Reese,
I believe he's on the line, yes.
Right. And also, Ms. Epstein, I was going to say for the record, she arrived at 2:40. All right, so we are actually going to start with the modification. The first item is going to be the Abbott Road Rehabilitation Informational Report. If they're here and ready.
This is a PowerPoint presentation, so if you,
I want to move.
stand on one leg, raise an arm.
I don't know if it's printed now, so I don't know, maybe it's not, I'll just do it.
Hold on. You want to click it for me?
Sure.
My name is Sherry Welsh. I'm a project manager for the Alaska DOT Central Region offices here in Anchorage. I was asked to brief the committee on the Abbott Road Rehabilitation Project between Lake Otis Parkway and Birch Road. This is a map of the bowl. You see down there in the lower right-hand corner, Abbott Road. I'm sure most of you are familiar with that road. You zoom in a little. This slide shows Abbott, again, between Lake Otis Parkway and Birch Road. To the north, I've highlighted in yellow the East Dowling Road extension and the Elmore Road extension, two state-funded projects fairly recently completed that have a profound impact on Elmore traffic and thereby an impact on the Abbott Road project. Very next slide. I'm usually asked to discuss a range of alternatives, but today I was asked to concentrate my discussion on a range of scopes, which is kind of unusual. Specifically about the various inconsistent scopes from the tip that which says, let's see, tips indicates the project will widen Abbott Road from 2 to 4 lanes, and it's not specific about where those lanes might be added. The MTP scope indicates that the project will widen Abbott from 2 to 5 lanes between Lake Otis and Elmore, and from 2 to 3 lanes between Elmore and Birch Road, with 2 miles of what it calls new sidewalk. The LRTP doesn't have a scope, but it does have a purpose and description for the project, and it seems to be a marriage of the tip and the MTP. It indicates we'll widen 2 to 4 lanes with 2 miles of, again, the new sidewalk. Obviously, these are not entirely consistent with each other, and my discussion will point out why the department feels they are not justifiable, and they are also inconsistent with what we'd like to do going forward with the project. I'll click it back. This is just an approximate outline of what I'll talk about. I want to talk about the project status a little bit. I want to talk about the purpose and need of a 3R project, which this project is. I'll talk about the traffic that drives the scope, along with the purpose and need. And then I'll describe what we anticipate the scope going forward will be. The project's still in preliminary design. Preliminary design is where we determine ultimately the approximate location and the type of facility we'll build, for which we'll also seek an environmental clearance. We've completed our safety and our engineering and our capacity analyses for this project. We're working on the environmental document. We're screening alternatives, which is why we're here talking to you. I think we've only recently come to understand the impacts of the Elmore extension and the East Allen extension projects. And now that the traffic has settled down on Abbott, we feel we know where we want to go, and thus highlighting these inconsistencies that have concerned our planners. We're about set to start public involvement in agency scoping. We'll be talking to the interested government agencies and the general public and community councils. We're updating cost estimates for our preferred, what we're thinking is a preferred alternative. Talk a little bit about purpose and need. As I said, this is a 3R project. 3R, you may know, is a resource and restoration and rehabilitation project. The purpose of these 3R projects is to extend the life, or the service life of an existing road. It's a 10-year horizon project. We also seek to enhance safety and capacity where analysis indicates that's necessary. And we do this by looking at the roadway's geometry and the crash history and try to see if there's a causal relationship between those two, and we can identify what we want to fix. The need for this project is driven by the fact that the Abbott Road is congested. It's been identified as having one of the higher crash rates on the hillside. If that's the highest crash rate. Talk a little bit about crashes. That sole red dot in the upper right-hand corner there is in the red segment. It indicates between Elmore and Birch. Gives that segment the dubious distinction of being the highest crash rate of any hillside road segment. I can't go into an in-depth discussion of crash types and locations and severity. It's a little beyond the scope of what I can talk about. So I'll stick to my scope and see if we can get to my scope. These next slides, click. These next slides show the impacts of the Dowling and Elmore projects on traffic. And the dashed line you see there is indicates what the traffic would have been using our growth rates for that area, where the Elmore and Dowling road extension's not done. And so we can see here in this first slide that well, we have almost a quadrupling of what would have been expected had we not built those two projects. We've gone from a little over 3,000 in 2006 vehicles per day to nearly 12,000. That's on Elmore. And of course, click that next slide. This is the segment between Elmore and Birch. Again, the prediction without the projects. And those two projects, what they've done is they've given us about a 20% increase between 2006 and 2010. Show that next slide. This is between Lake Otis and Elmore, and what this rather raw analysis shows us, I didn't point out that vertical line is the Elmore, when the Elmore thing, Elmore and Dowling. Dowling, of course, opened after Elmore, but it seems that the Elmore extension is a bigger thing. We've taken some pressure. This shows we've taken some pressure off that segment of roadway. We haven't quite gotten back to where we would have been predicted. We're certainly a little below it, or right at it, as opposed to those other segments. So what we've done is we put some more traffic on Abbott between Elmore and Birch. And this is, our waiting for this to sort of normalize is why we've sort of delayed this project. Now we have a pretty good handle on the traffic, and it is pretty much steady now, as indicated by those data points. So, our anticipated scope. What we anticipate doing is adding a continuous two-way left turn lane, a center left turn lane, with intersection improvements in the pedestrian facilities. Call it a modified 3-lane because we will have some auxiliary lanes and we'll have some dedicated lefts and rights. We will bring all the vertical geometry on the road to current standards. There is no horizontal geometry, speak of it, straight line. Pedestrian facilities will be retained. There's no new sidewalk. There's a very popular pedestrian pathway out there that's always got people on it, and it's that will be updated as necessary, but certainly it's going to be retained. New signs, roadside clearing for moose. We'll get to the conversation. The first thing I want to talk about is the issue of why we would not put a 4 or 5 lane between Elmore and Birch. This is the easternmost segment. And it's the tip in the LRTP, maybe it's a vagary of the documents, but it could be construed as saying that they're going to 4 or 5 lane the entire length of the thing. And concentrating a discussion on Birch Road intersection, we can I can talk about why we wouldn't want to put a 3 or 4 lane or a 4 or 5 lane facility through there. Analysis shows a 3-lane delivers an acceptable level of service, segment level of service. 3 lanes is adequate to provide a good level of service. We would anticipate putting a dedicated right turn lane onto Birch, which would negate a need for a second eastbound lane there. We only have the single eastbound departure from there for the through lane. And again, that intersection is, while it is not a great level of service right now, it does meet signal warrants, which is a separate matter. It's not in the scope of this project. It's not something necessarily that wouldn't be added at a later date. As far as safety on this segment goes, completion of the center left turn lane for the entire segment will, we believe, solve most of the incidents of crashes with the vertical geometry. We do have a cluster of crashes there at the easternmost entrance to the high school, entrance exit to the high school. There's a vertical curve there that needs to be flattened. You can see the right-of-way or easement requirements there in those bright red lines. But 3-lane is perfectly adequate for that segment. And so to disabuse any of the planning documents of their belief that we need a 4 or 5 lane in that segment is pretty easy. That's from an engineering standpoint. So from a social impact standpoint, there's a staunch resistance to bringing multi-lanes to a residential area. We know that from all our projects where we attempt to do this. And currently, we have a project on O'Malley between New Seward and Hillside. It's not my project, but project manager informs me she's got a vocal bunch opposing her 3-lane east of Lake Otis. So to think that you could get away with putting a 4 or 5 lane through there without losing your head, that would be a little bit dreamy. And there are the reasons. A multi-lane is perceived as inviting unwanted development. You hear that a lot. If you add lanes, you're going to get faster drivers, and nobody wants to walk across a 4 or 5 lane road. So, go ahead. The right-of-way impacts of a 4 or 5 lane section are extreme, and they are another obvious negative mark against a multi-lane facility there. From a permitting perspective, taking property from the park, school property, or Ruth Arcan in the other segment, or filling in additional wetlands where you don't have a compelling demonstrated need is another mark against multi-lane. Now let's talk about the other segment between Lake Otis and Elmore. Why not a 5 lane there? Again, I'll concentrate my discussion on an intersection. There's Elmore and Abbott. Well, in short, there's no place for eastbound traffic if you have 2 lanes of eastbound traffic to go. We propose a dedicated left turn onto northbound Elmore, which would take care of that. We would expand the storage for that left turn to accommodate that traffic. And then we have a through lane going to the sole eastbound departure from the intersection. There is no southbound Elmore yet. And so, in short, there's just no place to put 2 eastbound lanes. Click that again here. You go to the other end of this segment at Lake Otis. What we're proposing to do essentially brings a 5 lane section to the intersection. What we're going to do here is we're going to lengthen the westbound left onto southbound Lake Otis to increase storage there. And we also propose to put in an auxiliary lane that is eastbound from the intersection to shorten the queues that anybody who shops at Fred Meyer is familiar with. We have a very long queue to the west of Lake Otis on Abbott Road. And this is why I think it's fair to call this a modified 3 lane or a very, very short 5 lane. And that's what we would do. Now, as far as the rest of the segment goes, we achieve an acceptable level of service on the segment with the 3 lane, which makes up the majority of the segment. Very interesting stuff. Well, in conclusion, we don't believe a 5 lane is justified, a 4 or 5 lane is justified on either segment of Abbott Road. We believe a 3 lane modified with auxiliary lanes and the 3R fixes meets the stated purpose and need of the project. And we think the scopes of the community plans and planning documents should be amended to say so. Are there any comments or questions?
I got one. The horizon, the plan horizon you're using is 10 years? So your
Yes, 10 years for
recommendation-
3R.
Are you doing any, are you going to do any improvements on the west side of the Abbott Lake Otis intersection?
No.
Okay.
Any more easy ones like that?
I was gonna say that's the section of my municipality lines.
It's a good project. Love to see it get going. I drive it.
Any other questions or comments from the committee? Any from the public? Please state your name for the record.
Yeah, Todd Logan, you mentioned the existing multi-use trail along Abbott that it would be taken care of or maintained. There's a missing segment right by Service High School that we added into this project to connect. Right now, there's a disconnect between the Birch multi-use path and the Abbott path, basically at Service High School. There's about maybe a quarter mile or less that just right now dumps bikes and pedestrians onto the highway or into the snow.
I believe you're talking about where the path actually goes behind the school.
That is one alternative, though that's not being used as a multi-use path. Nobody will plow it in the winter, and while all the paths are plowed, so we have a missing link, at least for winter travel.
Well, the Muni's trail plan really dictates what we do, and what we're proposing is consistent with that. Any change to that certainly can be affected through coordination with the Muni. What we are looking at, and we have as an alternative in this project, is a pathway on the south side that begins where that segment veers to behind the school. But that is another thing that has to be coordinated with the school district, a school zone. We don't want there has to be a school zone in place if we're going to encourage crossing there. Right now, I believe children bus across the road from the neighborhood south of Abbott. We do have an alternative for a pathway to collect those approach streets on that side, and then if we can coordinate with the school district and also the municipality's trail plans, we could extend it that much farther, but we do not extend it all the way to the pedestrian overcross. That is simply because it's not something we've taken upon us, but it's something certainly we can look at, and probably I expect to be asked to.
Thank you. And as someone who lives in the area, certainly your 3-lane proposal for the rest of it certainly makes a lot of sense to me, as opposed to something larger.
Okay.
Well, just an observation, your planning
Ann,
horizon.
state your name.
Oh, Ann Brooks. Your planning horizon is 10 years for the 3R project. The MTP's planning horizon is 20 years.
That's
So I'm
correct.
not sure that the MTP scope is out of line. I think the MTP is anticipating that longer traffic, so.
Well, that's true.
Is that-
That's very true. That's very true. However, I have a 3R project.
Right,
And the
right.
plans do acknowledge it's a 3R project, and they describe it as a 5-lane. So if they were going to bust it out into a short term and a long term and say 5 lanes is a long term. And you're right, that some of what I've quoted is a long-term document.
If I might add too, this is an unusual area because it does have high traffic volumes, that if you just look, 20 years from now, based on volumes alone, it would say, oh, you need 5 lanes. And yet it's not commercial, it is bordered, you have basically traffic control with a park on one side. And so the options would be, with the federal highway process, if we were to pursue those 5 lanes, you would be looking at 3 to 5 years to get through the environmental process because of the 4F issue with the park and school. And you would delay any improvements. I mean, we're getting complaints about that intersection and I imagine the municipality does as well at Lagos and Abbott. So this is something that could actually move forward pretty readily and provide a huge amount of relief out there. And it seems to be a good alternative that's not completely inconsistent with our longer range plans. And so I do appreciate the project manager coming in, sharing this.
I didn't mention that we anticipate the class of action. In fact, we have a class of action on the environmental document as a categorical exclusion. Should be a very simple document. We do have to go through some public involvement, get comments from the public, see what their feelings are, their desires are.
And so the comments like the gentleman made here about the missing segments are the kinds of things that would be captured during the public involvement process.
Yeah.
And I'm glad to hear too. I suspected as much that a 3-lane would be much more acceptable in the community than a 5-lane.
Thank you, Jerry.
What else is he working on?
says 5 years and it talks about appointing 2 new members for 2 spots on the Freight Committee. You have your days in that packet there. So we have 2 positions that are on that committee, and we'd like to fill them with those 2 folks, and ask that you recommend that approval to all. Happy to attempt to answer questions. If not, then I can answer.
Craig, can you go over what the Freight Advisory Committee composition is in terms of slots and which slots these fill?
I don't know if I have the whole, I don't have the bylaws before me, but it's gosh, you know, there's an air cargo person on it, there's a hauler, a shipper, there's someone from the port, someone from the railroad, someone from the trucking association, someone from commercial vehicle enforcement, and that's what Rex Young is being appointed to. And then there's a public member spot that is Master Sergeant Ryan Holmes is being appointed to. Also a university spot. I probably have missed some, but there's a lot.
How many?
11.
11.
11. So just because there was a brief discussion earlier about the number of slots in the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, so there's more Freight Advisory Committee members than pedestrian.
Erica, how many are on the?
proposed the same number.
Same
11.
number.
Same number?
Like it had the same number as Freight.
Oh, I had to turn the page. Okay, thanks.
The reason that Rex Young is taking the 1 slot is Laura Edwards moved over to FMCSA, and so he is replacing her as the commercial vehicle enforcement.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions from the committee?
Move to approve these, nominations will go to policy committee for approval.
Second.
Moved by this house, moved by Clover. Do we have any opposed to move forward these recommendations to the policy committee?
Making sure the public doesn't have a.
Oh, yeah. Are there any questions or comments from the public about these appointments?
Aves Thompson with the Alaska Trucking Association. I currently chair that committee, and I would urge you to support these nominations and recommendations.
Thank you. Any others? No? All right, so we have a motion, it's been seconded. Are there any opposed? Hearing none, we are so moved. Moving forward on to policy. Alright, so 5C, the AMATS Air Quality Group appointments or reappointments.
Yep, we have, let's see here, if I remember correctly, we have 1 reappointment, Dr. Conway, second term on the committee, and then Stacy, who is on a member of the Planning and Zoning Commission, this is an appointment, a new member, to have a representative of P&Z on that air quality advisory committee. Tony Jones is the P&Z rep on there for a long time, and so now Stacy Dean would be the recommended appointee. So. There you have it.
Could I add-
Mr. Morris?
I understand that we're going to try to recruit somebody from the Public Transit Advisory Board. I think Lance has agreed to try to recruit somebody tonight, and I'm asking the committee to give me the latitude to forward, if Lance is successful, to forward a 3rd member for appointment to the policy committee, assuming that Lance is able to find somebody on the Transit Advisory Board. And I can forward their resume to you all of you. Go see the policy committee.
Now it's still the final slot. Any questions or comments on that?
Do you need that in a formal motion?
No, I was gonna, are there any questions or comments on these appointments from the public?
I propose that we move these air quality advisory committee nominations to one meeting for
approval and give the time to get another applicant from the Transit Advisory Board.
Second.
Ms. O'Malley, seconded by Mr. Willis. Are there,
One clarification, because I thought what Mr. Morris wanted was for that third person to move forward. Did you want the third person to move forward with the other two?
Yeah, I would like to just recommend the one member for reappointment, George Conway, and then Stacy Dean and Heath. Public
Because
Transit.
I don't think that's quite what.
Well, that's what I meant to do.
There you go. Intent.
That's what I'm asking. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
we intend to send them all? At least that was.
Well, that's why I said and.
Yeah, I know. Okay. So that was the intent. Was your second, was that the intent, Mr. Wilbur?
Yes.
Okay. Are there any opposed? It said no. All right, hearing none, we are coming. All right. The operating agreement we are not doing at this time. That brings us to the Bike and Pedestrian Advisory Committee bylaws.
Okay, I'll start it, and then Erica may have some other things to add, and, questions for it. This was a recommendation that evolved up a while ago. There are lots of NGOs around the country have non-motorized committees or active transportation, bike and ped, whatever you want to call it. And so we thought we would do the same thing. And as I said earlier, these bylaws are very similar to what we had in the freight one and what we had in the advisory group. And so the positions, areas of expertise or affiliation have changed, but other than that, they're pretty darn similar. And we showed this as a task in the UPWP of creating this committee. I don't remember off the top of my head exactly when we say we'll have it created by.
Second quarter this year.
Second quarter of this year. So we have a little time, but we would like to get a committee formed soon so they can be active in acting as a citizens advisory committee for our area-wide trails plan update. Renewal, whatever you want to term that next version of area-wide trails. And with that, we can attempt to answer questions that we might have. Unless, Erica, you've got anything to add to that?
Sure. Erica McConnell, AMATS Planner. I just wanted to mention that, we did start, as Craig mentioned, with the bylaws of the Freight Advisory Committee, but I also looked at bylaws from 3 other bike and ped committees at different MPOs around the country, and just kind of pulled what seemed to be the best concepts in their bylaws. Their composition was not useful because all of the ones that I looked at had lots of different political jurisdictions within their MPO, so it was a representative of this city and that county and that, whatever pulled together onto the committee, and since we don't have that, we didn't obviously do that. But we did brainstorm, kind of all the different groups we could think of that might have value to a committee like this, and it was actually quite difficult to cut it down to 11. But we did have 11 as our number because we were probably on the Freight Advisory Committee.
Are there any questions or comments from the committee? Ms. Edwards?
In terms of the preamble, I don't see a mention of helping set priorities. Was that something you discussed, and is it really incorporated in there? I think we had a previous discussion at the technical committee that might be one valuable function.
I guess the word priority is not in there, but under F, there's assist, advise, and submit recommendations regarding planning documents. There's assist with the development of project evaluation criteria and participate in project evaluation and programming. But we could work the word priority in terms of
Helping set priorities.
set priorities, funding.
Yeah.
Okay.
Helping in an advisory capacity.
One of the things that I kind of pictured this group would do when we rank and score projects for the TIP, typically we have 3 different groups that do that. We have the road section, we have the section, transportation enhancements, and then we have the air quality or CMAQ ones. And the CMAQ ones, typically I try to convince Cindy and Steve to help me out in scoring those projects because they're pretty detailed and they're pretty technical. The roadway ones, I tracked down Gary Jones and PM&E to help me because he has that base of knowledge for all the road projects. The TE ones, it's Lori Skanky and then whoever else I can get. And in this case, having an actual bike and ped group to help that's one of the thoughts that I had, is that they would be instrumental in helping rank and score. Obviously, just like all of our other advisory committees, they offer advice to us. They offer advice to the committees, and certainly the policy committee at the end. The policy committee makes the final decision. They can choose to utilize that advice or not. So, but that's kind of what I vision this group would do. They would help offer insight, they would help rank and score. And maybe it would be the entire group, maybe it would be some portion of them, might be a couple members. We can figure that out as we go. Usually ranking and scoring committees are not super large. It's representative of groups.
I guess, Erica, I'm wondering, do you think it would be helpful to have language about setting priorities in your, so I'm happy to make a motion.
I think it's covered, frankly.
I was going to comment, I don't think the language should be for an advisory committee like that to set priorities.
Helps.
But even helps set priorities. I mean, they're evaluating and they're recommending the projects, and then it's up to the policy committee to actually set the priorities. So I'm not particularly comfortable with that language.
I guess I always thought they would have more expertise than all of us on some of these issues.
Well, that's why I think that they're evaluating and recommending on that program.
I don't know what the freight bylaw say,
Yeah, Ms. White, I do have a question, and I brought it up before, and I think it's just brought on the heels of 3 times going before the Planning and Zoning Commission and not having the ability to take action. It have to do with quorum largely, and I noticed that the Freight Advisory is 11 spots, from what I understand, and the Air Quality Advisory Committee is 9. And I guess they're just asking staff, is the large number of those committees made it difficult to achieve quorums to actually be able to move project recommendations or issues forward? Has it been an issue?
No, not really. In fact, sometimes it's nicer to have a larger body because not everybody shows up. They're out fishing or they're moving freight in commercial interest. So for us, it's worked out.
So you've had quorums and been able to meet?
Yes.
Okay, and same with your quality, Steve, I guess, or?
I think a couple of occasions we've not had a quorum. So I'd say by and large, we can have a quorum.
So you don't think 9 or 11 is an unwieldy?
I think a quorum is actually a lower percentage when you have 11. So there's a higher probability of making it.
Oh, that's true.
It's 6 here, 11.
Thanks, Ashley.
I just have a question. Erica, on page 2 of 4, where it says community environmental organizations, I would just suggest taking off the Alaska Center for the Environment, and then where it says community-based organizations, take off the Anchorage Chamber of Commerce. Or, on the front page where it says public health organizations, like examples of who they are, I would just take it off the other ones, because then there's no expectation of it.
So you want to remove from the bicycle?
Yeah, just take off under I and J
You also want to see.
and C. And I think it needs to get done. Frankly, I don't think we should wait. I think the bylaws are basically the same as the freight. I've known Abe's is, if there were issues going on with the freight, and Teresa, if it wasn't working, we would hear about it. And I think that the Freight Advisory Committee in the times of the plan and the tip, they do provide good guidance, and I don't think that this would be a bad thing. They don't provide priorities, but they do tell the staff if this is what we think we should do, this intersection, this is an important project to the port, whatever. I mean, I think that they provide a value to us. So I'd recommend that we support the proposed bylaws and recommend them with my edits.
Ms. White?
I have just another question. There's two health organizations, one a public health organization and then a native health organization. And why were there two listed, or?
We wanted to have the Native community involved, and we kind of thought, well, what if we just took out health and just said Native organization, but we felt like, Bristol Blue Corporation or, Cook Inlet. I mean, we were just throwing out names that they wouldn't necessarily have expertise or knowledge of, pedestrian bicycle issues, but that a health organization was going to have some interest in that sort of thing. So, yeah, I do see and agree with you that there is some overlap there, but we really felt it was important to reach out and include a Native group.
And I guess that brings to the question of, what I just brought to mind is that what isn't represented here are some of the, and it may be advisable to say one or the other, but to have a social services agency who works with people that
Primary transportation walking or.
primary transportation walking, yeah, social services, so maybe it would be a public health or social services agency that could be under D, or it could actually be under I as well, a community environmental organization, or a social service agency. I'm just thinking of some of the issues that exist with the Rangers Shelter and Beans Cafe, and some of the issues that have been brought to our attentions with the need for different walking facilities for connection, where some of those people are, where they travel to. So I don't know what is the thought of the group here on adding that flexibility to the membership, or is there a recommendation or suggestion?
I think flexibility is good. I think public health is pretty important, so I might recommend adding it to I instead of
E. So maybe adding in a community, environmental, or social service. Lance, you were recommending?
I think your idea is right, having some kind of a social service agency as part of it, because I deal with them in the transit agency all the time, because people have to walk to get to the bus for the most part, and many of the people that I deal with in social service agencies. So I have the same question about why having two public health organizations, because whether they're a native public health organization or a non-native public health organization, we need a health organization. It could be Providence, could be Anchorage Neighborhood, the Alaska Medical Center. I think they would bring the same perspective, just.
So maybe have one of them replaced by social service agencies.
I would yield to the staff's efforts on their intent. It's up to you.
This is why it's hard to get it to 9 or 11, coming up with great possibilities for who should be on there. 15 is a little big, but.
Yeah. We also tried to think about groups that are represented in other AMATS committees or organizations or in some other way in the AMATS processes, and we felt like Native organizations really weren't represented anywhere else within AMATS, and that was one of the reasons that we chose to include that, even though, yes, it did have overlap.
Any other questions or comments from the committee? Are there any questions or comments from the public? Yes, sir. Please state your name for the record.
Lauren Frazier. I was just wondering on this, it's bicycle and pedestrian. Has anybody thought about including one of the skiing organizations, cross-country skiing, just looking outside 5 months out of the year? A lot of these trails and that are used by skiers.
Well, my office doesn't have one person that commutes by skis every day. I think this is primarily a focus on getting around rather than recreation. So that's why I would support keeping the focus on bicycling and pedestrian.
Jamie Acton.
I was wondering about the university component here. UAA has integrated a commuter services program, and with their capacity for the trial system, you know, tons of walking and things like that. I know you're trying to keep it low, but the student population, the staff population in the UMed district is definitely the consideration.
School district could be just educational, the Anchorage School District, I don't know how.
Sorry?
Well, I was just thinking, we have G, Anchorage School District could be educational institution.
Yeah,
I
but
don't know how.
I guess the concern for K through 12, I think, is different than the UMed and East like first grade. They both have completely different, both valuable, but.
We can have 21 members.
Everybody, come right in.
Bigger than the TAC and the PAC combined.
Yes.
Given the exchange that just happened, I'm assuming A and B, your municipal planning and project management, and your state DOT planning and project management would be staffed to the committee anyway in some format, so maybe there's room for unless you absolutely need a voting member that's, you know, strictly advisory, but, you know, that might be a UAA or social service agency or something else rather than having the staff.
When it comes to the, I'm wondering, I haven't had a chance to really review the bylaws in depth, but when we talk about a community business organization, I'm wondering if, you know, if within a 2-year or a term, let's say you have someone from the Anchorage Chamber of Commerce, would you want them for the next term, maybe somebody from the River, or for another term from Girdwood? I mean, what I'm worried about is that we're gonna get, policy committee is gonna get hit with these other outlying communities saying, well, yes, all these organizations are holistic in the sense that it's everything, but when you get down to these business organizations, it's gonna be focused, the representative may be an Anchorage business or community, and maybe they should have some kind of rotating, in the bylaws, it says, well, you know, you've got an Anchorage person for a term, you should try to get somebody else for it. And keep that rotating type thing between, so that they have some type of input from these other areas. Yeah.
Could also rotate between city planning or project management, state planning and project management, and that would open up a new spot too.
I'm just not sure how to handle these other issues with other communities.
A lot of competition for the public.
I know, there are a lot of,
Ann Brooks again. The other thing it might be is to have somebody that's inside ARTSA and somebody that's in an RSA, you know, road service area, just, you know, or subversive, because their maintenance issues, we've heard pretty strongly about maintenance issues in subversive for trails versus in facilities versus.
I'm wondering with the amount of discussion, perhaps we should have a work session.
Work session it is.
To break this down, I think it sounds like everybody's in favor of this and moving forward, but we want to make sure that we have representation from all of the groups.
Just a comment, I'm wondering if it's such a large committee, if you could have sort of 3 not specified affiliation people, where you can fill, you know, like it's appropriate to have an ARSA member now, or somebody from UAA because of the things that are going to occur in the next few years. I mean, it might be better to build in some flexibility in this, rather than have every slot have to be filled by a specific affiliation. And I do agree with Ann, I think that the project management should be staffed rather than, you know, these are people that are, I could see having municipal people on them, but not directly involved, you know, they're sort of peripherally involved in things. Like we've had municipal street makers on their quality committee. Not because they're equality directly involved, they just have something to do with it. But these are the folks that are kind of running the show. So I think it'd be better not to have them on the committee.
All of these we should talk about.
I will schedule a work session.
Okay.
We'll invite the TAC to show up, and whoever else wants to.
chat about it.
They will not have one. Are we gonna move?
Postpone pending,
Action.
Yeah.
sorry, I didn't.
Yeah, I move that we postpone action and so we have a work session and take it up next meeting.
Second.
And thank you, Erica, for bringing this forward. It's been a while since we've talked to you. Thanks. It was
Jerry.
Jerry, yeah. Do we have any opposed? Hearing none, we'll try to coordinate the employee session. Is there any other business items before we move on to the informational items? And we're moving on to informational items, and we had moved the 2035 update down to our first informational report. So, do we have any updates?
Sure, we're making progress. Barrett, I want to first talk about the schedule, and thank you. And then talk a little bit about air quality conformity, because there's some issues that have come up. A very important component of the plan. Schedule-wise, as Craig kind of snidely mentioned, there's been some postponements at the Planning and Zoning Commission. We originally had that was January 9th, I think, was the original public hearing. Public hearing was open, it was closed. There was a motion to postpone it towards the end of the month in order for the Planning and Zoning Commission to have additional time to review it. They also requested that we redo the response summary memo so that they could more easily find the changes in the public hearing document. And we agreed that that was a good idea, so we did that. We, at the postponed meeting, there wasn't a quorum for that meeting, and, is that right, Craig? Am I getting this right? It's been so convoluted.
5 members at the meeting, which is what they call a short board, which is enough to vote. One of the members declared a conflict of interest and recused themselves, so that brought us to 4 for that item.
And then they postponed it to February 6th. We had 5 members available then. We had a quorum. However, one of the members who wasn't at the previous meeting failed to review the minutes and therefore wasn't eligible to participate. So it's been now postponed to February 13th. We think we have a quorum for the February 13th, regardless of whether or not we have a quorum. We're going to be submitting the packet to the, what we call the pay system, in order to get it introduced to the Assembly on the February 3rd. Is that Friday?
28th?
Excuse me, that'd be
Yeah, it's gonna be introduced
on the 17th for, yeah, excuse me?
It'll be introduced at the 28th.
Yes, it'll be introduced at the Assembly on the 28th. So we have to get it introduced on the 17th, I believe, so it gets in the packet. Regardless what the Planning and Zoning Commission, we're going to go ahead with it. If they happen to postpone it, we will hold the discussion after the submittal, and if they come to a recommendation, we will then lay that on the table at the Assembly public hearing date. So we're just going ahead and with the Assembly review, regardless what happens.
Normally, what we want to do is have planning and zoning make have findings and create a resolution, and pass the resolution and sign it, and then when we take it to the Assembly, we enter it into the system so they get a nice packet with everything all at once. If we were to wait till that happens, we would be too late. We would be in danger of missing our conformity, our deadline of approval by June 12th, 14th. So what we're going to do is we'll go ahead and enter the project into the Assembly system. They will get the MTP, they'll get the comment, they'll get everything that we have so far except for a resolution from Planning and Zoning. Planning and Zoning will have their meeting, they will pass it, etc. We will take that resolution, that signed resolution, and lay it on the table at the Assembly meeting. They will get the same information, they just won't have it as a one packet entered into the system, seen, 30 days in advance or however long in advance the assembly actually gets it, but they will get the information. Just, if we're to wait, we'll miss our deadline and we'll go into conformity lapse and all of the not spending money being bad.
So if I may, for clarification, John, the assembly would be introducing it on February 27th, and then their scheduled hearing date would follow in March.
Typically, it would be March 13th.
Well-
However, we had a comment from Assemblyman Flynn at the last policy committee saying he would prefer to have the public hearing on the March 28th.
27.
Or 26th?
It's on
Or
Tuesday.
27th, okay.
It's on Monday?
Yes,
No.
public hearing on March 20th.
Assembly's on Tuesday, PMG is on Monday.
It would be on the 27th, yes, it would be on the 27th. And so that we don't have the conflict with spring break. But there'll be also a promise to help set up a work session, probably on March 23rd, to review it before it gets to the public hearing. If that's the case, if we keep to that schedule, we'll be fine. Then the TAC will be getting the recommendation from the Assembly for their meeting on April 12th. And then forwarding that recommendation to the Policy Committee on the 26th, which was our original schedule in any case, I believe, was to have it completed.
Do we really think we're gonna be able to get through all the comments of the planning, zoning, and assembly on that one day, April 12th?
Hard to say, based on comments so far, I don't think, it's mostly be reviewing the previous comments that weren't approved by the TAC for inclusion in the public.
Can I make a motion that we set additional dates now for extending the meeting on the 12th, so that we make sure that we have enough time in advance to plan around it, should we need it, to review documents, so that we have adequately put a recommendation to the policy committee by the meeting on the 26th. And that's a formal motion.
I second it, yeah.
I'm tired of asking for
Are there any opposed to the motion?
Just, may I ask a question? Cindy, right now, we're scheduled for a technical committee meeting on April 12th. Your motion is to go ahead now and schedule an additional meeting in April, prior to...
extension of that meeting. We're anticipating that we will need to extend the meeting
I just wanted to make
to
that-
already schedule in everybody's calendars
Okay.
and a room for an additional extension of this. We don't need it, hallelujah, but we've got it if we need it. My schedule is swamped. I need a schedule.
That's a good idea.
Are there any other questions, I guess, or?
No questions on Cindy's comment, but I have some questions for John.
Okay, so we have that motion, we've moved, seconded. Any opposed to that motion of scheduling now continuation, so we have days on calendar? Hearing none, there's a move. Should we doodle?
We'll do it.
All right. All right.
Stephanie, I'll be brief.
Ms. Rowland.
John, when you get the PACE item in on February 17th to get it in the municipal system, so the assembly gets an introduction on the 28th of February, there's no reason why the assembly couldn't begin the public hearing on the 13th of March. People would be available, they could get that conversation going, continue the public hearing until the 28th, and then if they don't have any more comments, they might be able to take action on the 28th, given the level of their comments. Worst case scenario, given the plan that Patrick wants to be in, which is they close the public hearing on the 28th, and they reserve to take action until the 10th of April. So when you put it in PACE, Craig, I would talk to Patrick as a policy committee, say, let's put it in as a public hearing starting on the 28th, or the 13th, continuing to the 28th. That would make you take action. There's no reason to wait. The only thing that would hold us up then would be the assembly docket saying, I mean, if we don't ask, we don't get. We might as well ask.
One caveat is, I would prefer to have a work session before we introduce it have a public hearing, so that they're familiar with the issues and they can ask questions before they have the public
I
hearing.
think
So-
Mr. Flynn originally asked to put the schedule in March 9th work session.
Oh, yeah, that's what I heard.
So I think we're okay
So
on
we're-
that.
And actually, I was gonna just recommend that, John, too, to get as quickly as possible, as soon as possible, the work session with the assembly so that we can be aware of what are some issues or questions they may have that may come up during the hearing
I believe that's scheduled already.
for the 9th.
Other comments?
I believe everyone on the committee got the information I sent around earlier today about the new Kamada financial plan that was sent to, and I apologize, John, I didn't include you on the copy, I'll send it to you, that was sent to the federal TIP office, and it has some new numbers in it, and I thought if it were possible, it would be great to have the new numbers. They submitted it in December, so we just didn't know from Kamada that that was the case, but the latest cost numbers for phase 1 and phase 2, and there are 2 phase 2 cost numbers, and I don't know how we want to deal with that.
Yes, Madam Chair. I would prefer not to change any of the numbers that are currently in the public hearing draft for the cost estimates. I mean, we just heard, for instance, Abbott Road might change, and that would be a cost estimate that would be drastically different from what we previously had in the plan as a 5-lane. I think what we have to do, what we do in long-range planning documents is make our best guess, our estimate of cost. We're inevitably, 20% high or low, or usually low in any case. It's just a planning estimate. I don't think it makes sense to be changing numbers as we hear new information along the way. You're, of course, very free to present that information to the assembly at the public hearing, as well as the policy committee, and ask them to consider it, or present that as new information for them. At this point, the public hearing document's out. As far as making any changes to any of the cost estimates, if there's a recommendation to make a change, I'd like to have that in the final document, rather than having to go back and make changes to the public hearing document.
I think that's unfortunate when one of the biggest projects in the document goes up more than 20%, and we have that information. It doesn't make us look good because we're not including the most recent information, but it's up to the committee to decide.
Inevitably, this cost estimate's going to change again. We know that there's going to be proposals that are coming in response to the RFP, and there will be at least 3 proposals. And each of those proposals are going to have different cost estimates. That's inevitable. So the question is, how often are we going to have to change it? We change it based on this. Do we change it after the proposal's in or new by the concessionaires? How many times do we have to change the cost estimate during this document, this process?
I just want to note that I appreciate that information, but I noticed that the TIFIA proposal was noted as preliminary also. I kind of agree with John. It seems like this is always in the state of motion. We have to, we'd never be done if we were continuously updating cost estimates for all these projects. Admittedly, this is a big one, but I think, again, what I saw was that was noted as a preliminary submittal for TIFIA. And so that too could change. And then it just seems like we've got to stop somewhere. And I think these are, like John was saying, these are planning level estimates. And I think that we wouldn't be changing other projects if we had an estimate that was 20% different.
No, I was just gonna note that this change in the estimate that in the preliminary submittal does not impact still our financial constraints analysis for AMATS. It doesn't change the assumptions in terms of what are the impacts to the Angle Pool and Eagle River as a result of the bridge. And so I think that we're still on very solid ground, with the assumptions that we have documented in there, acknowledging that because it is an active project that's advancing, with a certain amount of uncertainty in terms of legislative action and other things, that we've documented a point in time, and that it was based on a TIPI application that had already been vetted through FHWA. One of the two partners that has to approve and accept our fiscal constraints analysis for the EMTP. So I agree with Steve and John that it would be a different matter if indeed it drove or had a big impact on the fiscal constraints in the budget. Are there any other questions or comments on the schedule and where we're moving on with the MTP?
Might want to plan 2 extra days.
I almost did that because it took us three.
And we might still need to
Yeah,
do
we're-
that.
I know.
But some of us have vacations planned in the middle of that time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I won't be on vacation on the
That's true.
13th too.
Spring break. Are there any other questions or
Like the
comments?
day after, it just has to be.
Yeah, we have.
What I'd like to do, because we've had questions about the public process and when public comment opportunities are available, if Craig, you could give me the schedule as soon as we have it firmed up, when you get everything in paste, so I can republish and repost for the public when those meeting opportunities are available.
Thank you, ma'am. All right. Dan, Mark.
I don't think we have a lot of time to discuss this, but the other issue I mentioned was the air quality conformity determination. This might require a separate, I don't know, probably could be a whole meeting's worth of discussion on this, but it might be wise to give you a heads up on the latest developments regarding the consultation meeting, air quality consultation meeting, and status of the MOVES air quality process and some of the issues there. Steve would.
I want to bore people too much.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that it's not gone as smoothly as we hoped. And there's some issues with the EPA model itself, at least we think there are, that could jeopardize our ability to demonstrate conformity. Looks like there's some options that we have that could solve this problem in the short term. I don't think we're going to come back and say we can't demonstrate conformity. That's my, I'm an optimist though. But I think we'll work through it, and I won't regret, we don't want to know about the details.
Well, one other thing I will say is this. We've been working really hard. EPA Region 10 has been on board with us, FHWA, FDA, everybody, until FHWA asked what headquarters back east thought of what we were doing. And it's the headquarters back east that are causing us issues. So, hopefully we will figure it out. It's just a little more jump that we have to go through, but I'm trying to be optimistic like Steve that we'll get this solved. It's not just Anchorage, it's Fairbanks also. So more the merrier, and because, I mean, if anything, because we have these deadlines, it's making people push and work. And so this could be something that we've drawn on forever, but now we can't because, and part of the information to get everybody aware of this. And I think there'll have to be some compromises and some resolution because of the time that we have. So I'm still hopeful. I talked to you today and Wayne's still optimistic.
That's right. Just a question, by when does it have to be resolved so that it can go through the public review?
Well, I think we were
process?
planning for the TAC to release it on March 8th, is that right? That's that Thursday.
Right.
So we have to have the document done by the 29th of February and have a consultation sometime about that time as well, another consultation. So we have about 3 weeks or less to figure this all out.
Let's hold them less than that. We're putting as much fire in.
No problem. It's conformity. It's not like it's money. It's not like it's fun.
I was gonna say, is there anything else, or is that the last item you were, that's the last item?
This is the first I've heard of the issues, and I'm supposed to be representing the Air Quality Advisory Group. Are we going to have a meeting to?
Yeah, well, we were
share
planning to
this?
have a meeting during the public comment period when we release a document. So we'll talk about all this. In fact, we did talk about this a little bit when we did the SIP, this news anomaly, as we called it. I don't know if you
But we didn't know
remember
there were issues.
Right.
Well, we didn't actually expect there to be issues until now. But, I guess I was too much of an optimist.
It'll be an interesting.
Any other questions or comments from the committee? Any from the public? Yeah. Thank you for the update, John. And we're now on to item, it was originally 6A, but it is 6B now, the freight mobility update.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Teresa Good, I'm assuming AMATS. John, get by me. I just wanted to give you an update on some of the current and recent events with the Freight Advisory Committee. Recently, they approved their own freight prioritization study, and that's mainly just to identify bottlenecks, travel time, safety, and use a mathematical model to identify some of the problem areas, to maybe make recommendations to the advisory committees on future projects. Some of that data we hope will be used as a foundation for the upcoming freight study. We were funded for a freight study this year, so we've started drafting a scope of work and a draft RFP. And we have a subcommittee meeting on that on February the 17th to work on that and get that in order. Let me see, what else are we doing? Oh, we're doing some more real-time freight tracking program. And we have been doing real-time freight tracking with Dr. Jeff Miller, whom you heard earlier. About a year ago we started, and with the help of the Alaska Trucking Association and ABES, he was able to help the University of Alaska do some formal negotiations and agreements with UAA to install additional freight units into the major freight companies here. So I'm just assisting Dr. Miller with that effort. The data is confidential. The data will be used only for that UAA project, but we'll be able to have that help our freight study effort. And then our other big news is through the generosity of Alaska Railroad and Mr. Carr and Dave Logiski. They offered to have us go on a freight corridor tour, and the Freight Advisory Committee would like to invite the Technical Advisory Committee to join them on that tour to discuss freight priorities, the freight study. And that tour has now been scheduled for the 20th of June. It will go from Anchorage and go to Whittier and watch the intermodal barge movements in Whittier. And so Craig and I need to work on maybe some transportation on the way back so that people can get back to Anchorage quicker rather than waiting on the train. But as those details become available, I'll let you know. And obviously Bruce will be in the loop.
Hey, Aves?
Yes.
You can bring it back in a trailer?
Sure, we'll see if we can rent it for
And it'll be in a business car, so it'll be nice. Obviously, there's a limited amount of space, so it'll be primarily just the Freight Advisory Committee and the Technical Committee, and Craig and I as staff. And earlier, you may note in the memo that you have before you, I had anticipated that Master Sergeant Holmes would be his resume and his place on the Freight Advisory Committee would have been passed. But I was optimistic, and we have gained our military representative, so you'll see that on page 2. And further, we have some accomplishments that I'm sure you can read on your own regarding different presentations that myself and Dr. Miller made at the National American Planning Association on real-time freight tracking, and also some articles that we wrote for the various journals. It's still our hope to do a Freight Advisory Committee Freight Forum. With MTP effort, staff, myself, has not been able to focus as much time and dedication to that. And you can read the rest. We've coordinated with a lot of different people this year, such as University of Alaska Arctic Marine Shipping Assessment Committee, Mr. Joe Henry, whom I'm sure many of you are familiar with, Alaska Trans-Siberian Rail Tunnel Project, Mr. Jeremy Miller representing Alaska Ford, and Dr. Song Dae Kim with UAA.
I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Any questions from the committee?
I don't think we have the document.
Nope.
Okay.
I will make sure you guys get that.
Okay. Because I'm supposed to say, well. Are there any questions?
I just appreciate Abe's helping us out with this. I do. It's even though we meet intermittently, it is helpful for us. Thank you.
I'm excited that we'll have some great data as well.
I know the memo is online, so you can go to the AMATS transportation, and it's been online for about 2 weeks, so you can find it there and read it. Read about all the other accomplishments that the group has done.
If I might, that study that we're doing with the UAA is an interesting project. And it has transponders on the trucks, and it operates through the cell tower system, and takes that information, or that data, takes it back over to UAA, and then they process it through some sort of program. But what I was able to do is to be able to engage the drayage haulers, the folks that deliver around town, so we'll get a real good snapshot of where those trucks are going and how long it's taking them to get there. And so that should be very useful data. I'm excited about that data because I think that will help support our traffic congestion efforts and our reduction efforts and solve a couple of problems. Productivity for us, air quality for all of us, and maybe we can make some infrastructure improvements that would help smooth out that flow of traffic. So we're excited about that project and look forward to it.
Are there any other questions or comments from the public? No? Thank you, Teresa. And thank you, Ed. The next, we did the out-of-road rehabilitation study, the status of the Alaska Railroad Corporation.
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
it's going to be me.
Okay.
I think Craig caught me with the email when I was in Hawaii. When I emailed my project manager, he thought I was talking about FMATS because he's moved to Fairbanks. So, and everyone else went hiding when I came down. But anyway, I'll give you a brief update, kind of the status where we are. I'll look at that as a number of different areas. We had our open house in January, just a couple of weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago, I guess. So I hope you all were able to attend that. And if you don't, it's okay, but I would encourage you to do that in the future. We cover a large number of projects from Seward to Fairbanks. So you get not only Anchorage, but you get all of the projects that we're doing. That's usually held the second week in January, something like that, which is why I schedule my trips to Hawaii during that time period.
I was on door prizes.
And door prizes. We have door prizes, and we have shrimp, and we have, everything. Despite the cost of that open house, we are financially sound. We did make a profit this year. It looks like it will be about where we budgeted, somewhere between $10 and $13 million. That money goes right back into the infrastructure, supports about a $60 to $80 million a year program of federal, included with the federal funds. A couple of the issues that we have outstanding is the highway authorization bill, and while it's still working through the committees of jurisdiction, there are some issues in each of those bills, each of the houses, that do affect the Alaska Railroad and or affect as well our transportation funding. So while it's somewhat of a, not necessarily a fruitless effort, I do encourage you to keep up as much as possible with whatever information your lobbyist or your particular folks who are tracking those give you information. It's quite interesting how those bills are evolving. That one committee in the House says, gee, we're going to cut the mass transit account. And then the other committee in the House, says, gee, there's nothing wrong with anything that's going on. So there's just the right hand and left hand don't necessarily know what they're doing. And the Senate has not at least been in favor of what some of the House stuff is going on. So it should be an exciting time as we look forward to the future.
This week and next week.
Well, I think most people believe that it's really not going to be passed, but who knows? There's 2 bills that have to be put together on the Senate side. There's 3 bills that have to be put together on the House side. The House Rules Committee will be taking it up this coming week, so that we will then have a House version that we'll be able to look at. But anyway, so don't print it off yet. It's 964 pages. I made that mistake. Anyway, as far as what we're doing in Anchorage, specifically in Anchorage, we're not doing too much. We have an Anchorage locomotive fueling and servicing facility that we've had on the books for about 10 years. It's about a $2 million project. We did some analysis about 8 years ago and put it off on the side. We're trying a new process of fueling our locomotives. We're doing what's called wet fueling, and we're having trucks deliver the fuel directly to the locomotive. They have to put up some environmental protection areas, and then they fuel the locomotives. Each locomotive takes about 3,000 gallons, so it's a significant operation. For example, on the coal turn where you have 7 locomotives. So it's we're not sure how this is going to all work out. There's a little bit of a increased cost to the fueling process itself, but we're thinking it may save us some time, because otherwise we'd have to break the train apart and move them over to the fueling rack. Plus the fueling rack is expensive, so we're trying to look at that. We have a small curve alignment in the Clutina area, which we actually got some FRA funds for rail line relocation. Again, it's not a huge effort, but it will help us eliminate one of our sharp curves. The one that we really would like to keep on moving with is the Ship Creek Intermodal Transportation Center. We have about $30 million left to go on that project. We've spent a neighborhood of $25 million so far. That includes tracks and rehabilitating the building itself. But now we want to get to the next step, which is actually improving the facility. We've tried Tiger grants. We're trying every single kind of grant process that we can. The city has been supportive of that, so we look forward to maybe sometime breaking in. I'm sure if you've been tracking it, it's interesting to note that of the Tiger grants, Alaska's gotten 2. One was for Auk Bay, just outside of Juneau, and the other one is on the west coast of Alaska, or in a small village, to improve their boardwalks and things like that. Worthwhile projects. That's not the issue. The issue is the state of Alaska has gotten about $3 million out of hundreds of millions of dollars. Now, I know the city, I know the state has worthwhile projects. So as you talk in your senior management meetings, talk about what can we do as a group. One of the things I've really noticed in the successful applications is there's a tremendous amount of cooperation among all of the agencies, the local business community, NGOs, that really these people go into their applications together. And I think that's something that's lacking here in our particular state. It may help improve our opportunity. And for those of you who happen to be along in the Ship Creek area, we are improving the sewer system down there, so that should help you work a little bit better. The last major project, of course, is Port Mac. Port McKenzie project is moving forward. There has been a notice filed by the Sierra Club. They may or may not file a lawsuit against it. In the meantime, the Mat-Su Borough continues to seek additional funding for it. There is a placeholder of $100 million in the state transportation GO bond that they're considering. So that would be a positive step forward, and that would basically move the project within about $80 million, I think, something like that. I'm not sure exactly what their numbers are. But that one is expected to be completed by 2015 if the funding comes through. So that will be done. And that's about what we're doing. Oh, and then the last thing is the state rail plan. I'm still waiting to see the RFP for the state rail plan. So again, that'll be something that will be of interest in the Anchorage area. So with that, thank you very much.
Any questions?
Thank you.
Any questions from the council?
Just a comment, all the public development I do around the state, people don't know where money comes from. I think, there ought to be something on AMATS website that says, current funding authorization through March 2012. With a link to where you can find out more information if you want, just to help people understand where funding is coming from. You could, it could even be an agenda item in the link that you could just do a summary once a month that says the status of the funding. But, I think there's an education piece that we're not doing by just not, it's not an agenda item, but it is our lifeblood. There should be some way to help people understand what's going on with funding. And even at the state level, even just putting an information link to the current legislation having to do with funding for projects in the AMATS area, something.
Any other questions or comments? No? Thank you, Mr. Grant. Appreciate it.
Are there any other informational reports at this time?
Passed out the e-road receiving study that we highlighted for conversion. Funded through AMATS, as you remember, so there you have it.
Great, are there any final committee comments before we adjourn?
If you're looking for something to do, thirsty for live entertainment, Public Transit Advisory Board is going to meet at 5:30 in City Hall. We're going to look at the MTP, and I'm going to ask them to pass a resolution in support of the MTP transit elements. That's from their other items. So, it's free, right next to Humphrey's afterwards. I'm just saying.
Dan Savage, if you say it.
No, I will think about that.
Location, All right, the next meeting is the policy meeting that will meet 2 weeks from today, February 23rd in City Hall. And our next meeting is March 8th. So, thank you very much, everybody. We'll adjourn.